My son called me on a Tuesday morning at 9:47. I know the exact time because I was in the middle of signing a contract extension with a supply chain firm out of Columbus, and my assistant had specifically told everyone to hold calls until noon. When she knocked on my door anyway, I knew something was wrong before she even opened her mouth. "It's your son," she said. "He says it's urgent." I picked up the phone. "Dad." That's all he said. Just that one word, and I already knew. Not what had happened exactly, but the shape of it. I'd heard that voice before. Not from him, but from myself, 30 years ago. Standing in a parking lot in January, with nothing but a toolbox and a decision to make. "Where are you?" "Riverside Park. The one near the footbridge. Don't move." I told my assistant to reschedule the Columbus meeting. Grabbed my jacket off the back of the chair. Didn't explain anything to anyone. That's something I learned a long time ago. When your family needs you, you don't explain, you just go. I spotted him from across the grass. He was sitting on one of those green park benches near the water, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. My grandson Oliver was next to him, 7 years old, wearing his school backpack, picking at something on the bench with a stick. 2 duffel bags were on the ground at my son's feet. My son's name is Garrett. He's 34 years old, broad-shouldered like his grandfather was, with my mother's dark eyes. He looked up when he heard my footsteps on the path, and I watched his jaw tighten the way it does when he's trying not to fall apart. Oliver jumped up immediately. "Grandpa!" I hugged my grandson first, held him an extra second. Then I sat down next to my son and looked at those 2 bags. "Talk," I said. He exhaled slowly. "Warren fired me this morning." Warren, my son-in-law's father, the man who owned Kellerton Manufacturing, a mid-sized industrial parts company out of Cincinnati that my son had worked at for 6 years. Started in the warehouse, worked his way up to regional operations manager. He was good at it too. I'd seen his numbers. Margins were up 11% in his division last year alone. He called me into his office at 8, Garrett said. Said he'd been thinking about the company's future. Said he needed people in leadership who understood the Kellerton legacy. People who had the right. He stopped, looked at the water. He said our family didn't come from the right kind of stock, that a man like me could never really understand what it meant to build something that lasts. I didn't say anything. He said Kellerton Manufacturing was going to stay in the family. The right family, and that he didn't think I belonged there anymore. Oliver was a few feet away, still poking at the bench, pretending not to listen the way kids do when they're listening to everything. "What about the house?" I asked. My son and his wife Vanessa had been living in a house that Warren owned. One of those situations that sounds reasonable at the time. Young couple, below market rent, staying close to family. I'd had my reservations when they first moved in, but Vanessa grew up in that neighborhood, and it made her happy, so I kept my reservations to myself. "Vanessa's staying," Garrett said. Warren told her it was time to make a choice. He rubbed the back of his neck. "She didn't tell him to go to hell, Dad. She just stood there." That landed harder than he probably knew. Not because I was surprised, exactly. That landed harder than he probably knew, not because I was surprised, exactly. But because I remembered a version of that moment from my own life, and I knew exactly how much it cost a man to sit with it. Oliver wasn't at school yet when it happened, Garrett continued. Warren made me pack a bag in front of my own son, told me I could come back for the rest of my things when the adults had sorted things out. Those were his exact words. I looked at my grandson, 7 years old, backpack still on his back, watching a duck near the water's edge like he was the only person in the world who'd never been hurt by anything. Kids carry more than we think they do. They just carry it quietly. "Where's he supposed to be right now?" I asked. "School started 40 minutes ago." I nodded, took my phone out and called my assistant back. Told her to reach out to the principal's office at Oliver's school, Maplewood Elementary, and let them know he'd be absent today for a family matter. She didn't ask questions. She never does. Then I stood up, picked up one of the duffel bags and said, "Get up." Garrett looked at me. "Dad, I don't know what I know you don't," I said. "Get up anyway." Oliver ran over and grabbed my free hand. We walked to my car. I want to tell you something about Warren Keller, because I think it matters. I met the man 11 years ago at a dinner in Cincinnati when Garrett first brought Vanessa home. Warren sat at the head of the table in a suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, and within 20 minutes he'd found 3 different ways to mention that his grandfather had founded the company in 1951. He talked about heritage the way some men talk about religion, like it was a thing you were either born into or you weren't, and the people who weren't should be grateful anyone let them in the door at all. I smiled and passed the bread rolls and didn't say much. I've spent my life not saying much to men like Warren Keller. It's a strategy I learned early, and it has served me very well. Garrett asked me once when he was in his mid-20s why I never seemed rattled by anyone, why I could sit in a room with someone loud and important and not seem even slightly impressed or threatened. I told him the truth, because I'd already done the work. When you've spent 30 years building something real, you don't need anyone else's approval of it. You already know what it's worth. He didn't fully understand what I meant at the time. He was about to. I drove them to my place, a house in Hyde Park, Cincinnati, that I bought outright 12 years ago. 4 bedrooms, a backyard with an old oak tree. Oliver loves to climb. Garrett had been in this house hundreds of times. He'd never once asked me how I paid for it. I set Oliver up in the guest room with cartoons on the TV and a bowl of cereal. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with my son. "Tell me everything," I said. "Not the summary. Everything." So he did. For the next 2 hours I listened. About Warren's changing attitude over the past year. About the comments at family dinners about people who built things versus people who managed other people's work. About a meeting 3 months ago where Warren had introduced a new hire, a kid named Bo, 28 years old, Warren's college roommate's son, as the future of Kellerton's leadership. About how Garrett had started to see it coming but convinced himself he was imagining it. About how Vanessa had started making excuses for her father in ways she never used to. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I poured us both a cup of coffee and said, "Do you know what Sova Partners is?" He frowned. "No." "What about Ridgeline Capital Holdings?" "I've heard the name." "Investment firm. Holding company," I said. "Private. Has stakes in 22 mid-sized manufacturing businesses across the Midwest. Kellerton Manufacturing has been a portfolio asset under Ridgeline Capital since 2019. My son stared at me. "Warren Keller doesn't own that company outright," I said. "Not anymore. He sold a controlling interest 6 years ago to cover a debt he'd rather not talk about. He has an operational title and a seat at the table, but the table itself belongs to someone else." Garrett set down his coffee cup very slowly. "How do you know that?" I looked at him. It took him a moment. I watched the understanding move across his face the way light moves across a room when someone opens a door. "Dad." His voice was different now. Quieter. "Who owns Ridgeline Capital?" "I do," I said, "since 2009. I need to back up because this part matters. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. My father was a machinist. My mother worked the counter at a hardware store. We were not poor, but we were the kind of not poor that meant my parents counted things. They counted the miles on the car. They counted the days until the next paycheck. They were honest, hard-working people who believed that if you did your job and didn't make trouble, you'd be all right. I believed that for a long time, too. Then I was 22 and my father got laid off from the plant where he'd worked for 19 years. And I watched what happened to a man who had given everything to one place and had nothing to show for it but a handshake and a card signed by the whole department. And something changed in me that year. Something got very quiet and very determined. I started small, a one-truck hauling operation in 1987, moving industrial equipment between facilities in the Ohio Valley. I drove the truck myself for the first 3 years, 7 days a week in the beginning. I didn't talk about it much because there wasn't much to talk about. It was just work. But I saved everything I made. And I reinvested everything I saved. And I paid attention to where things were going instead of where they'd been. By 1995, I had a fleet of 12 trucks and a contract with a regional distribution center. By 2001, I had a logistics company with 40 employees and revenues my accountant told me I should be very quiet about. I listened to him. By 2009, when the financial crisis had knocked a lot of good businesses sideways and scared a lot of people out of the market, I was in a position to buy. So, I did. Ridgeline Capital was the holding vehicle I set up to do it cleanly. I didn't put my name on anything public, not because I was hiding, but because I'd watched what happened to men who got loud about their money. The sycophants showed up. The relatives you hadn't heard from in years showed up. The deals got complicated by ego instead of logic. I kept it quiet. I kept it quiet for 34 years. My son grew up in a good house, went to a good school, never wanted for anything, and genuinely believed his father was a comfortable, retired logistics consultant who'd done reasonably well for himself. He had no idea, and I'll be honest with you, part of me wonders even now if I waited too long. If a father's job is partly to prepare his son for what's coming, and I prepared him for everything except the truth about who he came from. But that's a conversation for another day. That Tuesday afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Beverly who's been handling my affairs for 18 years and who does not rattle easily. I told her I needed a letter drafted, formal, on Ridgeline letterhead, to be hand-delivered to Warren Keller at his Cincinnati office the following morning. I told her what I wanted the letter to say. She was quiet for a moment, and then said in her very dry way, "You've been sitting on this for a while, haven't you?" It wasn't a question. The second call was to the CFO of Ridgeline, a man named Stewart who has worked with me since the early days. I asked him to pull together the quarterly reporting file for Kellerton Manufacturing and have it on my desk by Thursday. He said he'd have it by Wednesday morning. The third call was to Vanessa. That one was harder. She answered on the second ring. I could tell she'd been crying, and I could tell she'd stopped herself from crying, and I could tell she wasn't sure which version of herself I was going to get. "Mister," she started. "Don't," I said gently. "You've called me Dad for 6 years. Don't stop now." She was quiet. "I'm not calling to make this harder," I told her. "I'm calling because you are the mother of my grandson, and whatever happens with everything else, that doesn't change. Oliver is here. He's safe. He had cereal and he's watching cartoons, and he asked me if we could get pizza for dinner, and I told him yes." She made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "I need you to know," I said carefully, "that some things are going to become clear in the next few days that your father should have been honest with your family about a long time ago. When they do, I'm asking you to think carefully before you make any decisions. Can you do that?" "What kind of things?" she asked. "The kind that change the shape of a situation." She was quiet for a long moment. "Then, Dad, what did you do?" "Nothing yet," I said. "But I'm about to do something fair." Beverly's letter arrived at Warren Keller's office at 9:15 on Wednesday morning. I know the exact time because Beverly sent a courier with a time-stamped confirmation, which is the kind of thoroughness I pay her for. The letter informed Warren Keller that Ridgeline Capital Holdings, as the controlling stakeholder of Kellerton Manufacturing, had become aware of a personnel action taken on Tuesday, October 14th. In which a regional operations manager with 6 years of service and a documented record of performance improvement had been terminated without documented cause. The letter further noted that this termination appeared to conflict with Ridgeline's stated governance policy regarding merit-based employment practices, a policy Warren had signed his acknowledgement of when the acquisition closed in 2019. The letter requested that Warren make himself available for a stakeholder meeting at the Ridgeline Capital offices in Hyde Park at 2 p.m. on Friday. It was signed by Beverly, as legal counsel to Ridgeline Capital Holdings. My name was not on it. Not yet. Garrett spent Wednesday in my guest room, mostly. He helped Oliver with his homework that evening. My grandson had made it to school Wednesday morning, dropped off by me, carrying a note I'd written to the teacher, and then after Oliver was asleep, Garrett came and sat with me in the kitchen. "I looked up Ridgeline Capital today," he said. "I figured you would. There's almost nothing online about it. That's intentional." He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. 34 years, he said. "You built all of that, and you never told me." "No," I said. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. I took my time. Because I watched what inherited wealth does to people, I finally said. I watched it make some of them soft, make others mean, make them think the comfort they lived in was something they'd earned instead of something they'd been handed. And I didn't want that for you. I wanted you to know what it felt like to start somewhere and work your way forward, to earn a thing and know exactly what you traded for it. But I was working for the man who, he stopped, shook his head. Dad, I was working for a company you own, for 6 years. A company I have a controlling stake in, I corrected him. And yes, I knew where you were working. I watched your performance reports. Your division was the strongest in the portfolio for 3 of the last 4 years. He stared at me. You were watching me. I was proud of you, I said. There's a difference. He sat with that for a while. I let him. Then he said quietly, you could have stopped this any time. Yes. Why didn't you? Because I didn't know yet what the man was truly made of, I said. Now I do. Warren Keller arrived at the Ridgeline Capital offices at 1:52 p.m. on Friday. I know because I was watching from my office on the 2nd floor when his car pulled in. He came alone. That surprised me slightly. I'd half expected him to bring an attorney. But Warren Keller had spent his entire life operating on the assumption that his grandfather's name was armor enough. He walked into the lobby of my building with the posture of a man who believed he was attending someone else's meeting, not his own reckoning. Beverly met him in the conference room. Stewart was there. 2 members of the Ridgeline board were there by video call. I let them sit for 6 minutes. Then I walked in. Warren looked up when the door opened. He saw me and I watched his face do something interesting. 3 or 4 expressions in the space of 2 seconds, like a man flipping through a deck of cards trying to find the right one and realizing he doesn't have it. Hello, Warren, I said. You. He stopped, cleared his throat. Please sit down, I said. He sat. I took the chair at the head of the table, not because I needed to make a point about it, but because it was my table. Had been for 16 years. I'll be straightforward with you, I said. Ridgeline Capital has held a controlling interest in Kellerton Manufacturing since 2019. That's not new information to you. You signed the acquisition documents yourself. What may be new to you is that Ridgeline Capital belongs to me, has since 2009. Warren's jaw moved, but nothing came out. You terminated my son on Tuesday, I said, on the grounds that his bloodline wasn't the right kind, that he didn't come from stock worthy of your company's legacy. I paused. I'm curious what you thought that meant exactly. He straightened in his chair. The old instinct. The Kellerton name has stood for... The Kellerton name, I said calmly, is on a company that you no longer control. You have an operational title and a compensation package that this board has the authority to revisit at any time. I'd recommend keeping that in mind going forward. The room was very quiet. My son, I continued, spent 6 years building the strongest performing division in your portfolio. He did that without knowing who owned the company above you. He did it on merit, on work, on exactly the kind of thing you told him his bloodline wasn't capable of. Warren's face had gone a particular color. I don't have a good word for. Not red, not white, something in between that looked like a man watching a floor give way beneath him. Here's what's going to happen, I said. My attorney has drafted a reinstatement offer for my son, which your HR department will send to him by end of business today. His title, his salary, and his performance record were restored in full. The termination will be documented as a procedural error. You can't. Warren started. I can, I said simply. I've reviewed the legal provisions. Beverly will walk you through them if you'd like. Beverly nodded from across the table without looking up from her folder. Warren looked at me for a long moment. I didn't look away. Is there anything else you'd like to say? I asked. He said nothing. Good, I said. Then I think we're done here. Beverly will see you out. I stood up, picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, walked to the door. I stopped with my hand on the frame. One more thing, I said, not turning around. My grandson's name is Oliver. He's 7 years old. He watched you make his father pack a bag in front of him on Tuesday morning. Whatever else happens between our families, I need you to understand that I will not forget that. And I need you to understand what that means." I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. Garrett got the reinstatement offer that evening. He called me from my driveway. He'd been staying with me all week, and I could hear him standing outside in the dark because he needed air. "They're calling it a procedural error," he said. "I know. Did you? Dad, did you do this?" "I did what was fair," I said. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then he said, "All this time, you were the reason the company even stayed open. Weren't you? When they took on the investment, they were talking to you. They were talking to Beverly, technically, but yes." Another long silence. "Vanessa called me today," he said finally. "She wants to talk. She wants to bring Oliver home." "Good," I said. "She's upset with her father." "She should be," I said, "but she should also be patient with herself about it. It's a hard thing to see your parent clearly for the first time. Give her some room. Dad." His voice broke slightly just at the edges. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I thought about that, about the right way to answer it, about all the things I could say, about legacy, about protection, about wanting him to earn what he had, about the fear, underneath all of it, that if he'd known too soon, it would have changed him in ways I couldn't predict. "Because I wanted you to become the kind of man you are," I said, "and I wasn't sure you'd get there the same way if you knew. Maybe I was wrong about that. But you did get there, that's what I know." He didn't say anything, but I heard him exhale. "Come inside," I said. "Oliver's waiting. He wants to show you something he built with the Legos." Oliver did show us something he'd built. It was a lopsided tower with a ramp going up one side, and he explained, very seriously, that it was a car launching station for emergencies. Garrett and I sat on the floor of my living room for the next hour, while a 7-year-old launched small plastic cars off a Lego ramp and into a pile of couch cushions. It was, if I'm being honest, one of the better hours I've had in recent memory. There are things I still think about when I'm quiet enough to think. Whether I should have told Garrett sooner, whether the secrecy was wisdom or whether it was something more like stubbornness. A man holding his cards so close to his chest that even the people he loved couldn't see them. Whether you can protect someone and prepare them at the same time, or whether those things always cost each other something. I don't have clean answers. What I know is this. I spent 34 years building something because I watched my father give everything to a place that gave him nothing back, and I decided at 22 years old that I was going to build a thing that could not be taken, something with my name under it, even if the name wasn't visible, something that lasted. My grandfather had a saying he used to repeat at the dinner table on Sunday nights. I couldn't have been older than 8 or 9 the first time I heard it, and I didn't understand it then. He said, "The man who has to tell you he built something hasn't built anything yet. The work speaks." I've tried to live by that. Warren Keller came from a family that had put its name on everything it owned and expected the world to honor the name. My father came from a family that had put its hands on everything it built and hoped the work would speak for itself. The work didn't always get to speak in my father's time. The world wasn't always listening. But I had 34 years. And the work spoke just fine. Vanessa and Oliver moved back home the following week. Garrett went with them. I helped carry the boxes from my guest room to his car on a Saturday morning, and Oliver held the door open very seriously each time we went in and out, like it was an important job. Before they drove away, Garrett hugged me for a long moment on the sidewalk. He's not a hugger generally. Gets that from me. "I want to understand it all," he said quietly. "Everything. How it works, what it means. I want to know." "I know you do," I said. "Will you teach me?" I looked at my son, 34 years old, my mother's dark eyes, strong hands, 6 years of work that nobody ever had to tell him to do. "Come to my office Monday morning," I said. "We'll start there." He nodded, got in the car. I stood in the driveway and watched them pull out of the street and turn the corner and disappear. The October air was cool, Leaves were coming down from the old oak in the backyard, drifting past the side of the house. I stood there for a minute, hands in my pockets, feeling something I don't always let myself feel. Something like being finished, like watching a thing you built hold weight. That's what it is, I suppose, when you've spent your whole life building quietly. Eventually, the building holds, and you finally get to let people in. I've been thinking a lot lately about what a man actually leaves behind. Not money, not property, not even a name on a building. Those things matter less than people think. And I say that as someone who spent 34 years accumulating all three, what a man leaves behind, if he's done it right, is a way of moving through the world. A way of handling the hard moments without losing yourself in them. That's the only thing that really transfers. Everything else is just paperwork. Warren Keller believed he was passing something down to his family, and in a way he was. He passed down the idea that your worth comes from where you started, not what you built. He passed down the belief that a name on a letterhead is the same thing as character. He ran a company for 20 years on that belief, and when it was time for the world to weigh it against something real, it came up short. That's not misfortune, that's consequence. The choices a man makes about what he values have a way of catching up with him, not as punishment but as result, like a math problem that always balances out, whether you're watching or not. Garrett could have become bitter about what happened to him that Tuesday morning. A lot of men would have. There's something specifically humiliating about being dismissed in front of your own child, having someone look at your son and use him as an audience for your degradation. I know what that costs. I know what it takes to carry that without letting it turn you into something smaller than you are. What I watched Garrett do in the days after, the way he sat with Oliver, helped him with his homework, held himself together while everything around him was uncertain, that told me more about who he was than 6 years of performance reports ever could. I want to be honest about something. I don't think I handled the secrecy perfectly. There were years when I told myself I was protecting him, and there were probably years when I was really just protecting something in myself. The quiet satisfaction of being underestimated. There's a version of humility that tips over into withholding, and I'm not sure I always stayed on the right side of that line. If I have a regret, it's that Garrett spent 6 years proving himself in a room where I could have simply opened a door. Maybe that was wisdom. Maybe it was stubbornness wearing wisdom's clothes. But here's what I know for certain. The work he did in that room was real. Nobody handed him those margins. Nobody handed him the respect of his team or the discipline it took to show up every morning for a man who looked at him like he was temporary. He built that himself. I just made sure the building had a foundation he didn't know about. Integrity works like that. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need an audience. It accumulates quietly the way good soil builds, year after year, a little at a time until the ground is deep enough to hold something. Garrett has that kind of depth. I watched it develop in him the way you watch a tree grow, too slow to see day to day, unmistakable when you step back and look. What I hope he takes from all of this isn't the money, or the revelation about what I built, or even the satisfaction of watching Warren Keller sit in a room and realize the floor had shifted under him. I hope he takes the understanding that real power, the kind that lasts, the kind that means something, doesn't come from what you inherited. It comes from what you chose to do when nobody was watching, when no one was keeping score, when you could have quit and had a perfectly reasonable excuse to do so. He didn't quit. He never did. That's the bloodline that matters.